Hello and welcome to my January reading wrap-up for 2022. After this wrap-up, I will be all caught up on my 2022 wrap-ups, which there have only been 3, but small steps. I read 11 books in January, and I actually read them all in the first 11 days of January, and then I read nothing else for the rest of the month. So, lots of books to talk about, but I did read them all in less than 2 weeks. I got COVID at the end of December, so the first half of January was kind of rough for me. And then I was catching up on all the work and stuff that I missed. But I do have a lot of good books to talk about here today, so I'm very excited about some of them. Some new favorites, some new least favorites, many exciting things, so let's get started. The first book that I read in January was The Home for Unwanted Girls by Joanna Goodman. This is a historical fiction novel set in Canada in the 1950s. A 15-year-old girl becomes pregnant and gives her daughter up to an orphanage, and this follows the dual perspective of the mother as she continues to live her life and the daughter who grows up in the orphanage that eventually becomes a mental asylum, as all orphans are declared mentally ill in order for the orphanages to make more money. I gave this 4 stars and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was just one of those books that grips you from the beginning. It flows so well that it's just from page 1, I was so engrossed in the story. I never wanted to put it down. I had some negative thoughts on it while I was reading it, but for the most part, I was just really down for the story, really fascinated by it, because you get a lot of culture of Canada in the 50s and what it's like for people who are of French descent or of English descent and how there's kind of a divide between them. And I also just really enjoyed the characters. I got really absorbed in who they were and what their struggles were, and it was just really lovely. I also think the writing style was nice. It was very simplistic and kind of juvenile at times, which I really enjoyed because of who the main characters were. You're following Maggie, a 15-year-old who gets pregnant, and then you're following Elodie, who grows up in an orphanage, doesn't get hardly any education or any knowledge of the outside world. So it makes sense that it feels so juvenile and so young. And I really enjoyed that element. I think some of the story elements in here didn't work the best for me. I didn't really love the romance. The romance felt very especially when they were adults, it felt very cheesy and cliche, and it made sense when they were 15-year-olds falling in love, because that's how 15-year-olds fall in love. But when they were in their 30s, I didn't really love how the relationship was developed. And there are a few things like that I just think kind of needed some more time, some more depth. But overall, this book was really wonderful. I picked this up at random and I got one of her other books as well. And I was thinking at the time that it was kind of risky to get 2 books by a random author I'd never heard of before, but now I'm super excited to read the other one because this was just wonderful, and I'd highly recommend if you like historical fictions. Then I read the book of Essie by Meghan MacLean Weir. This is young adult, potentially. I'm never quite sure on if this counts as young adult or adult, because it's got some very adult themes and some very adult characters, but at the same time it does vibe as young adult to me, so that's what I tagged it as. But I'm going to say this is a young adult contemporary about a teenage girl who grows up in a family that's known for their reality TV show. They're very religious. Her father's a pastor. They're very fundamentalist, and it's kind of about her life behind the scenes, how she became pregnant as a teenager in this very religious, very media savvy family. It's kind of loosely inspired by the Duggars, it's that kind of religion and that kind of family. Well, I should say inspired is probably not the right word, but it's kind of similar in a lot of ways to the Duggars and their show. And I love this. I gave this 5 stars. This is a new favorite for me. I didn't know anything about this going in, and then when I was reading it, I was just this is wonderful. This is everything that I had wanted this book to be without even knowing that I wanted this book to be it. This follows 3 characters: Essie, one of her friends, a boy who goes to her school, as well as a reporter. And it basically just follows the 3 of them on their journeys into what's going on here. 'Cause the question of how Essie got pregnant and who the father is really important for the story. And it's just so fascinating and so dark, and all of the characters are just incredibly well developed. And I am such a sucker for like stories about famous people behind the scenes, especially people who like didn't choose to be famous. It's why I love The President's Daughter by Emerson White, or a reason I like books like that, where people are dealing with the media and like how their choices, every single choice, no matter how seemingly insignificant, does matter and will be noticed. And it's very manipulative, both in the media sense and also because this is how Essie was raised, in this media-rich environment where the cameras are always pointed on her. It always matters. It's how her mother reacts. So it's how she's learned to control the world. It's just through manipulation. It's really wonderful. I am not doing this book justice, but like 5 stars, my second book of the year. This is great to me. I love this. If you like kind of darker themed contemporaries, like it's very much like a character study of Essie and also like these people, and it was just fascinating. This is what I'm going to reread. Like I already know that, like, give me a couple years and I'm gonna reread this, and I'm already excited to do it. Wild Princess by Mary Hart Perry. I gave this 2 stars, so we do have to have some slightly more negative books to discuss here. I'm still me, even if I love some things. This is a historical fiction book about Queen Victoria's daughter. I forgot her name. Princess Louise. Louise was kind of known for being the first person in the royal family in like 300 years to marry a commoner. And I mean like a very wealthy commoner, but still a commoner. So this was billed as like the story about her defiant daughter, and like she's described as rebellious, and I was like, oh, this sounds really interesting. You know, like it's about this girl in the Victorian era who like doesn't want to stick with her royal family, who wants to branch out, who wants to like do other things and like be different and be interesting. And like that's not really what this book is about. Like it's kind of that, but this is mostly set when she's in like her 20s, after she's been married to, yes, the commoner, but he's not really important to the story. He's very gay and kind of uninvolved, so he winds up being basically irrelevant. This is a romance more than anything else, which I didn't know going in, and like I really wish I had, because I probably wouldn't have picked it up because it just wasn't for me. There was lots of like big strong manly men catching swooning damsels in distress vibes, which isn't for me. She swooned at least twice in this book, which like literally used the word swoon. And her romantic hero is this like big strong man who is American. He's like part of the Secret Service, but like I think Lincoln got shot. When is this set? So I think he has like some issues about that and feeling like he let Lincoln get shot. I think it was Lincoln. It's been a minute since I read this book. And there's also this like whole plot to like assassinate the queen, and it's very melodramatic and very like poorly done. It was just such a flat story, and I'm pretty sure it just existed for the sole purpose so that the romantic hero could like look like a badass saving the day at the end of the book, which like he does, I guess. I don't know. It's just hard for me to talk about this or give this like a fair review, because if I'd known what this book was about, I wouldn't have picked it up. It does kind of say it in the synopsis. The first 2/3 of the synopsis are just about Louise and like a scandal that was covered up in her youth and like her being so rebellious. And I was like, that sounds interesting. So I stopped reading the synopsis and picked it up. And then the last third of the synopsis is like, oh, a tall, handsome American recruited by the Queen's elite Secret Service to discover the truth. And he has a code name, and he vows to risk his life to protect the royal family. No, not for me. I don't think this was great. I think like the whole assassination plot could have saved it for me had it been good, but it was very like just flat, and pointless and didn't really exist for any good reason in the book. Not for me. If you like this kind of thing, you will probably enjoy this more than me. I didn't think it was particularly well written. I didn't think the characters were awful though. So like, the characters seemed fine, just not the story for me. So I wouldn't say avoid this. If you want like a Regency, a Victorian era romance, maybe you'll like it. I didn't. And then something that really disappointed me and crushed my heart a little bit. Children of Nazis by Tania Krasnianski. I wanted to love this so badly. Just so badly. I wanted to love this book. This is about the children of Nazis. It's a nonfiction book, and it is just portraits of 8 different Nazi children, like the daughter of Himmler, the son of Mengele, like 8 really high-ranking Nazis. This is just about their children and their lives and like what happened to them after the war. And it sounded great. I've read fiction books like this before. I enjoy fiction books like this because it's an interesting perspective, because you don't know what the children think. Like, they were just raised in that. Were they brainwashed into it? Do they still believe that? Do they find their own way? Like, it's an interesting thing to think about just when it comes to humanity and who people are. And I'd never seen a book like this before. I gave it 2 stars, and I think after reading it, the reason there aren't more books like this, because it's a very interesting subject, is because there's no information. Like, there's not enough information to fill this book, in my opinion. Like, it's a fairly short book, and I did the math at one point on the pages, and each chapter about the children averages to about 25 pages each, because each chapter is about a different child. And within that chapter, you get a summary of their father, what their father did, what happened to their father after the war, a brief summary of how the child lived during the war, and then the rest of it is like information about the child. That's not a lot of space to have information about the child, because it wound up being like 10 to 12 pages of each chapter was about the father. Just like what they did during the war, who they were in the Nazi regime, like how they grew up even. And there's very little about the children. I honestly felt like I did this at one point. I went to the Wikipedia page of one of the children, one of the more famous ones. I think it was Himmler's daughter. I went to her Wikipedia page. I went to her father's Wikipedia page first. Skimmed his personal life. Went to her Wikipedia page, read it. Basically the same information. Because there isn't information about these people. The author of this book only spoke to one of the children, because only one of them was like able or willing to speak to her about it and be interviewed, and he's apparently written a few books, and he seems very angry at his father and like very anti-Nazi, which like understandable. I'm not blaming him for anything. And that was by far the most interesting chapter of this book, because it actually offered something about him that was new, that was interesting, that was different. The rest of them were like the barest of summaries, because a lot of these children, the Nazis lost. So it's not really great for you to like associate closely with Nazis, especially like in Germany post-war. Like, you wouldn't have had a great life if you went around talking about how great Himmler and Mengele were all the time. Like, so a lot of the children shied away from the media, didn't do interviews, didn't lead public lives. Like, there's not information about them because they led very, very private lives. And like, there wasn't enough information to fill this book. It just wound up being like, I could have looked up the Wikipedia pages of their fathers, read the summaries of their personal lives, and probably gotten basically the same information. And it was just really, really disappointing. Like, I wanted so much more, and I don't think it was the author's fault. I just think this couldn't be a book. Like, there's not enough information to make this a book. And I think it was an interesting concept because I was fascinated by the concept, but the information just isn't out there. It's not available. It was really interesting about the one guy she interviewed. I forget who it was. I think it was Nicholas Frank. Was the one she interviewed. I think I was skimming through the children in this, and that one sounded the most familiar to me. And it was really interesting because she talked to him about like his relationship with his father and how he kind of dealt with the feelings of it. And like, he was very willing to like go into it. He's written books about it. Like, that's kind of like how he's built his life. And it was like, if all the chapters had been like that, that would have been amazing. That would have been a great book. But like, Etta Goering does not want to talk to the press. I don't know if she's alive, actually. But like, when she was alive, she wouldn't talk to the press. Like, there's just very little known about her and like her thoughts and feelings and everything. So I don't know, like, this just wasn't a book. Like, if you're interested by this, go to the Wikipedia pages and read like the personal lives of these men, because you'll probably get similar information and you won't have to sit through a whole boring book for it. I don't know. I was sad. I wanted to love this. I just desperately wanted to love this, and it was kind of nothing. Accused by Lisa Scottoline. This is a thriller. It's actually the first in her, what's it called? Rosato and D'Annunzio series, which I've read at least one other book in this series. I don't like Lisa Scottoline books. I kind of just read this to get it off my shelf because I was like, I probably will not enjoy this book. Didn't. So, 2 stars. This is an adult thriller about things. A teenage girl was murdered, and like 10 years later or something, her younger sister comes out and is like, I don't think the man who is sitting in prison for killing her actually killed her. So she hires these lawyers, and they just start looking into the case, and drama ensues. 2 stars. I said that? I don't know. It was boring. I find that with a lot of Lisa Scottoline books, is they're just boring because all of the cases happened in the distant past, and a lot of it is just investigating these things that have happened. Not recently, no one really cares super much anymore, but they did happen, and they were dramatic back then. And then all her books kind of end, well, I say all, the ones I've read about this series seem like they end with the main character, Mary, running for her life from some criminal who's trying to murder her. And she survives because it's a series. She has to survive, I guess. Kind of be more interesting if she didn't. And they kind of close the case off screen a little bit, and it's boring. I don't really have anything positive to say about this book. I don't like the cases. I don't think they're interesting, and I don't think they feel very current. They feel like these things that happened a long time ago and don't super matter anymore. You could do that well in a thriller, but I don't think Lisa Scottoline does. I don't like her writing style. One of the characters, oh my god, this drives me crazy. One of the characters in this book is hard of hearing, so he shouts everything he says. And Lisa Scottoline illustrates that by writing all of his dialogue in all caps. And when he's in there for a scene, just like talking constantly, especially with his buddies who are also hard of hearing and sometimes speak in Italian, it just winds up reading like this really cringy Who's on First skit, and I hate it. Like, it's miserable. They were like trapped in a car for 10 pages, just like shouting at each other, not understanding each other, not hearing properly what's going on, and just throwing in some Italian because they can. And like, I hate this book. This is the best Lisa Scottoline book I've read thus far. I gave both the other ones 1 star, so like, I don't know. I don't recommend it. I don't recommend her, and I won't be reading anymore. 3 tries is about all I can manage for an author. Forward by Abby Wambach. This is her memoir. Abby Wambach was a member of the women's U.S. national soccer team for a very long time, starting in the early 2000s, I think. I was a child. I was very into soccer as a kid. Still I am. Love soccer. But I was like a tiny bit young for the Mia Hamm era. I caught like the tail end of it, but Abby Wambach was kind of like my peak interest in soccer, like her career. And like, I kind of started like getting old enough to be into soccer when Mia Hamm and the others were like on their last legs, and Abby Wambach was just coming up, and I loved Abby Wambach. She was amazing. I loved watching her play. And this is just her memoir. Like, it's a sports memoir. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I was expecting to give it less. I was expecting this to be like kind of standard, kind of boring, just like about how hard she worked to play soccer, and like she loves soccer and whatever, and blah blah blah, normal like sports memoir stuff. Abby Wambach hates soccer. That was one thing I wasn't expecting, because for her to go off for a very long time about how much she wanted to quit soccer, and I was like, oh my god. Understandable, but like, I'm glad I didn't read this when I was like 12, because that would have shook me to my core. I don't know that I could have handled that. That would have just broken my soul on account of how much I love soccer. But this was really interesting. Like, it was a lot more in depth than I expected it to be, about who she is as a person and her flaws and kind of like her struggles with herself and like being okay with herself. And it's really dark. Like, it doesn't paint like a pretty picture of her, but it feels real. Like, I read memoirs where like people talk about their flaws and stuff, and they don't always feel super genuine, but this one did. This felt like her being honest and authentic, and like, I really enjoyed that, because it felt like she was actually sharing herself with the people reading this book. So I don't know that I'll reread it, but I'm definitely keeping this for my shelf because I really enjoyed it. I don't know who to recommend this for. If you like Abby Wambach, or if you like US women's soccer, that's probably like a Venn diagram that's a circle. But if you're interested in that, I would recommend picking it up. I think it's worthwhile. If you're not, I don't think there's enough here for someone just reading this to read a memoir. Like, I think it's really interesting and really well done, but I still think it's a sports memoir of an athlete, and you kind of have to be at least a little bit interested in that athlete to care. So probably no one who's watching my channel, but I did really enjoy this. Then I read The One by John Mars. This is a science fiction-esque soulmate AU. They've essentially uncovered the gene that can determine your soulmate. So if you submit a DNA test to this company, it's very like about capitalism as well, which was interesting. If you submit a DNA test and your soulmate has also submitted a DNA test to this company, they can match you with like 100% accuracy, which is, I love soulmate AUs like so much. They're my favorite thing. I need to read more, because like reading this was just so happy making. Like, not even because this book was good, which it was, 4 stars, great book, but just I love the concept. I love like all the different elements you can have within a soulmate AU, like all the positives, all the negatives. Like, will this like break up relationships? How do you deal with the fact that this stranger you've never met is your literal soulmate with like absolute certainty? You know this. Like, what if your soulmate does some things you don't like? What if your soulmate doesn't speak the same language as you? Like, there are so many things. Like, it's just fascinating to me. So I'm pretty sure I was always going to love this book. This is a really dark take on it. It's kind of billed as a thriller. I don't think it's quite a thriller. I think it's more of like a really dark drama or contemporary. It does have like some murdery elements, but like a thriller light maybe. I think if you go in expecting a thriller, you'll be disappointed by like the thrilleriness, if that makes sense. But I love this. It follows 4 different couples. They were all really interesting, really well developed situations and relationships. I like the characters. I like the stories of all of them. Just a really solid book. My main complaint was about the short chapters. They're really short. They're all like a couple of pages long. And because there are 4 couples who don't intertwine at all until like the very, very end, you wind up getting like 3 pages on one couple. And you gotta wait like 12 to 15 pages before you go back to that couple. So I would like forget who people were. And it would take me a second to be like, wait, which one was this situation? Who was Clara? Like, who are we talking about here? Like, what's going on? And it's like, I could always figure it out. Like, it's not like I'd read the whole chapter and be like, I have no idea. It was just like, it took me a second of like confusion almost every time. And that got easier as it went along, but it was like the first half of the book I kind of struggled with that. And I just think the chapters kind of needed to be longer for me. And also, every chapter, it felt like, ended on a dramatic note or a cliffhanger or something. And again, because the chapters were so short, it was like every 3 pages, it would end on like a cliffhanger. And it kind of got a little bit cartoonish for me. Like, it just seemed a little bit silly almost. Like, I was just kind of like laughing at it because it seemed so ridiculous. Yeah, not really a fan of that. but this book is great. I highly recommend reading it. If it sounds interesting to you, it's just like a really wonderful book. Then I read The Journal of Douglas Allen Deeds, The Donner Party Expedition 1846 by Rodman Philbrick. This is a My Name is American book. It's one of the historical fiction diaries that I really enjoy collecting. It's middle grade. These are lovely. I think these are great books. This one is about a teenage boy who's an orphan who was part of the Donner Party, who, if you don't know, they were an expedition traveling west in the 1800s who basically got stuck in like Utah, I think, Nevada maybe, something like that. They took the wrong path and got trapped there over winter and basically were starving to death and resorted to cannibalism. Dark topic for children. I think it's done well. I gave this 4 stars. I think this is a good one. I think it really handles the topics and like what's going on well, and it kind of like shows the whole situation and like translates it to a way that's appropriate for children. Like it shows people fighting on the road and like them choosing to go the wrong way, and you kind of like get a really good lens into all that's happening, and I think it's really well done. I don't think it's like my favorite of the middle grade diaries, but this is a good one. The only thing I didn't super love was that the main character is 15, and this is definitely written for an audience that's a lot younger than 15. So it did kind of feel like maybe the main character was toned down a little, because he sort of acted a little bit young for his age, which I didn't super love. But good book. I'd recommend it. I don't really have much to say on these because they're just like, they are what they are. If you read the title, you know what the book is, and they're pretty much all decent, at least. And then we get to my least favorite book of the month, of the year, that I've read since The Pleasures of Men by Kate Williams, which is still the worst book I've ever read, but this is a very close second. Scruples by Judith Krantz. Yay. I read it. I'm unhauling it, and it will leave my shelf forever, and hopefully I will forget the massive amount of time that I spent on this book, because it's thick, and it took me forever to read. So 1 star, if that needs to be said, which I feel like it probably doesn't. This is about a high-end clothing boutique in the 80s, question mark? When was this set and released? 70s. In the 70s. Basically, this rich woman was kind of fat and ugly and unsocial, and then she went to France for a year and became hot, and then she married a really rich man, and then she decided that with all her massive amounts of money she wanted to own a clothing boutique. And it's also about 2 people who work at the clothing boutique, a designer and some dude who just compliments women, and I don't really know what his job is because all he really did was compliment women the whole time. That's what this book is about. I don't really know what else to say. It wasn't good. I didn't enjoy it. It was not so much about their lives as it was the clothing boutique and how that came to be and what the store is and everything about the store. So much about the store. I didn't care about the store. Like, the main character, I'm going to call her the main character. I don't remember her name. What was her name? Oh, it doesn't even say, so I'm not going to try to find it. She went to France for the summer or the year or something, and that was actually kind of interesting. That was the closest this book came to having a narrative or having like character growth or anything like that. Like, she was in France and like struggling in France because of her French not being great and because it was very different than what she was used to, and like it was almost kind of interesting. And then the rest of the book was not. I was so bored. I was like beyond bored reading this. I was like contemplating DNFing it, but I was reading it for a video and I don't like DNFing things, and I was like, let's just get through it because I don't know if it still counts for the video if I DNF it. So I did, and like, yeah, I finished it, and I really shouldn't have because it took me a very long time, and every time I sat down I was like, let's read 6 pages. If we can get through 6 pages, that's great. And I'd be like, another 6 pages. Let's just power. I hated this book. I powered through it, but like, my god, I shouldn't have. I regret it so much. I can't even like talk about the book itself because I feel like I've just repressed how painful of an experience it was. It was just like really sexist and homophobic. Because it's set in the 70s. It was written in the 70s, you know, like it's a product of its time, and because it's so much about like Hollywood culture or like Beverly Hills culture, I guess, and like the pettiness of like the rich and famous, it's like there's nothing to it except for that. And I would say it was racist too, but like to be racist you gotta have more than white people in the book, which is all it had. Yeah, not a fan, don't recommend it. I'm sure there's an audience for this. If you really are invested in a high-end clothing boutique in the 1970s in Beverly Hills, maybe you'll like it. But I don't think anyone who watches my videos would enjoy this, probably. But feel free to prove me wrong. And if you do like this, please explain in the comments why, because this was a painful experience of a book for me. And I would really like to hear from people who enjoyed it. And not just in like a nostalgic way, like I read this as a kid because it was a dirty book and the only dirty book I had, which is basically what 90% of the Goodreads reviews were. But like, it wasn't even that dirty. Like, I'm pretty sure I read dirtier books when I was like 12 that were like young adult. Maybe I was like born too late to appreciate the qualities this had for like a 12-year-old. I don't know. Not a fan. Not a fan. It's getting unhauled and I can't wait to have it like gone forever, because like it was definitely that kind of book where I was just like, I need this like out of my eyesight now. It was too much suffering for me. Then I read another historical fiction middle grade diary. This is Love Thy Neighbor, the Tory Diary of Prudence Emerson, Green Marsh, Massachusetts, 1774, by Anne Turner. This is about a girl who was a Tory during the American Revolution. That's pretty much it. Or like just prior to the American Revolution, I think. Yeah, basically she's a Tory and she's surrounded by, I'm blanking on the word for them. In history class, I feel like we just called them Americans. The Patriots. That makes sense. She's surrounded by patriots, and like there's kind of like a big divide going on of like patriots cutting Tories out of their lives. Like she's not particularly wealthy or anything. She's not like a governor's daughter. She's just like a kind of average family who just happens to be loyalists. So yeah, it's about her. I gave this 3 stars. I think it's good. Like I think all of these are pretty much decent. I don't know that I've read any that I disliked. This one, I don't think captures the situation as well. It's very limited by her viewpoint, which all these books are, and you really enjoy that aspect of them. But this one felt a little bit too limited. Like you didn't really get a good glimpse of what was going on in the outside world, I felt like. The way I did with like the Donner Party book. But it was still fine. Like it was good. Like I probably read this as a kid. I probably enjoyed it as a kid. I enjoyed it just fine as an adult, but I don't think it was like amazing. But then my final book of the year, my final book of the month was something actually amazing. Long Bright River by Liz Moore. I've read Liz Moore a couple times before. She wrote The Unseen World, which I mention all the time is like one of my favorite books ever. I say one of, it's probably my favorite book ever. So I've just been trying to make my way through Liz Moore's books as a whole. This is about a cop in Boston, Philadelphia, close enough. Different state, close enough. This is about a cop in Philadelphia. She's a young woman, a single mother, and her sister is a drug addict and a sex worker, and she kind of like doesn't have much of a relationship with her sister anymore, but keeps an eye on her. Like her sister works the same beat that she works, so like their paths cross, and there's a serial killer in town who is killing sex workers, and her sister goes missing at the same time, and it's about them, it's about their relationship, their childhood, their lives now, and like the killings that are going on, and it's really, really well done. Not a thriller, I should say that, because it sounds like a thriller, but it has thriller elements, but it's more of like a dark contemporary vibe, kind of like the John Mars book. I don't think this reads like a thriller, and I think if you go in expecting a thriller, you will be disappointed, because it's really more of like a character study and a family story, and the thriller elements are very secondary. Wonderful book. I gave it 5 stars. It's probably the best book I read this year so far. We're only in April, but this is definitely going to be on my favorites for the year. It was just wonderful. It's so well written. I love Liz Moore's writing style. Like, she could write anything, and I would probably love it just because she's crafts a story so well. Like, whatever the story is, she just writes it so well. She has amazing writing. But I do think that, like, the story was really good. Like, there's so much going on, but it all ties together so well, and it makes sense, and it never feels like melodrama. Even when it kind of feels like it should feel like melodrama, it doesn't. It feels real, and, like, the pain these people are feeling feels so real, and it's just, like, so well crafted and so wonderful, and it's just, like, so good that I struggle to talk about it because I can't pick out the things I enjoyed, because, like, I just enjoyed all of it. Like, the characters, great. The story, great. The writing style, great. I don't know, like, everything, great. Like, so good. Like, so sad at times, so bittersweet at times. There was so much going on, and just, like, family drama and, like, relationship drama, and, like, there were so many heartwarming things and heartbreaking things, and just, oh, I highly recommend this. It's such a good book. It's so well done. It's just, like, one of those books that's just good. It's so good, like, in every element. Like, it's like I almost forget how good it is because, like, every part of it is just good. And there's nothing to kind of, like, there's nothing bad about it to make the good parts look better, because it was just all that good. Highly recommend. I love this. I cried. I love books that make me cry. So, like, yeah, if this sounds like your kind of thing, I honestly cannot recommend this enough, and you should definitely pick it up. And also The Unseen World, because that was fantastic as well, and probably just anything she's written. So that was everything that I read in January, and this makes me up to date on my 3 reading wrap-ups of 2022. So hooray! Let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them if you have, and as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.